The law was absolute. No woman could wear the crown, repeated in every coronation ceremony for 800 years. The law existed for a reason, the scholars said. It had been tried centuries ago, and the crown had rejected every attempt. It remained silent, dormant, refusing to awaken its magic for any woman who dared approach it. So the law was clear, and the law was enforced, and for 800 years the kingdom had been ruled by an unbroken line of kings, until the line broke. King Aldric died without sons. He had 3 daughters, brilliant and capable, each trained in governance because he had hoped that the law might change, that the crown might evolve, that his kingdom might be ready for a queen. But when he died, the council made their position clear. The daughters could not inherit. The law forbade it, and the crown would not accept them. The throne would pass to the king's cousin, a man named Grievin, who had spent his life in military service on the distant borders, who knew nothing of administration or diplomacy, who had never expected to rule. But he was male, and he carried the bloodline, and the law demanded that he take the crown. The eldest daughter's name was Meryn, and she had been her father's heir in everything but name. She had studied law and history, had sat in on council meetings since she was 15, and the law forbade her. She stood in the throne room on the day of Grevin's coronation, watching a man who barely knew the kingdom's provinces prepare to wear a crown that should have been hers, and she felt rage burn through her like fire, not just at the injustice, though that was there, but at the waste. The silent crown sat on a pedestal before the throne, waiting to be placed on Grevin's head, to govern through connection rather than force. The crown was calling to her. Grievin stood there, wearing the crown but not bound by it, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. The priest removed the crown, checked it for damage, and tried again. Still nothing. A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. This was not supposed to happen. The crown always accepted the rightful heir. Always. Its silence meant something was wrong. Felt the crown calling her so strongly that she took a step forward before she could stop herself. And another. And another. She walked toward the pedestal as though drawn by invisible threads, and she could not have stopped even if she wanted to. The nobles fell silent, watching. The high priest looked at her with alarm and disapproval. Grievin stepped back, uncertain. And Meryn, knowing she was breaking the law, knowing she was committing an act that could be considered treason, reached out and took the crown. The moment her fingers touched the metal, the world exploded with light. The crown awakened with a force that shook the throne room, with a power that had been dormant for 800 years but had never truly slept. It sang with recognition, with joy, with the certainty of finding what it had been waiting for. And it bound Meryn with a completeness that took her breath away. She felt the kingdom flood into her consciousness. Every person, every village, every field and forest and mountain. She felt their needs, their fears, their hopes, and it had done so with such force that everyone in the throne room felt it, a shock wave of power that left them stunned and silent. Meryn lowered the crown to her head, and the moment it settled, she felt something fundamental shift. She was no longer just Meryn, she was the queen, not queen consort, not queen regent, but the true and rightful ruler, bound to the kingdom by the oldest magic in the realm. The silence stretched. The nobles stared. The high priest looked as though he might faint. And Grievin, who had been about to become king, simply nodded slowly, as though some part of him had always known, He was not meant for this. Enough to make the statement that this was not rebellion but recognition. The crown had spoken, and the crown's word was law, even when it contradicted every other law in the kingdom. The kingdom was about to tear itself apart, and she was the reason why. The days that followed were chaos. Half the council resigned in protest, their letters of resignation delivered within hours of the coronation ceremony. They cited the violation of sacred law, the corruption of ancient tradition. Several noble houses declared that they would not recognize Meryn's rule, that they would govern their own regions independently until a legitimate king could be found. The military split, with some commanders pledging loyalty to Meryn and others to Grievan, even though Grievan himself had publicly accepted the crown's choice and had no desire to fight for what he had never truly wanted. There were riots in the capital, both supporting and opposing the new queen. Some saw her as a revolutionary, a symbol that the old ways could be challenged, that women could finally step out of the shadows they had been forced centuries. Young women gathered in the streets with signs declaring the crown knows and capability over gender. But others saw her as a usurper, someone who had broken sacred law for personal ambition. These crowds threw stones at the palace, burned effigies of Meryn dressed in the crown, chanted that the kingdom would fall under a woman's rule. And through it all, Meryn felt the weight of the crown, felt the kingdom's turmoil, as though it were her own pain. Traveling the kingdom to understand its regions, sitting in council meetings to learn how decisions were made and implemented. But nothing could have prepared her for this, for trying to govern a kingdom that was divided over whether she had the right to exist as its ruler. The council members who remained met with her daily, and their counsel was blunt, sometimes brutal. "You must abdicate," they said again and again. "You must step aside and let Grievan take the throne. The crown made a mistake, or you corrupted it somehow, or it is malfunctioning. But you cannot rule a kingdom that will not accept you. You will destroy us all by clinging to power that was never meant to be yours." The crown did not make a mistake, Meryn said, and she could feel the truth of it through the magic that bound them, through the connection that pulsed between her and the silver and iron circlet that now sat upon her head. "It chose me. It has never been more certain of anything. You felt the power when it awakened. That was not corruption. That was recognition. That was 800 years of waiting, finally ending, because it found what it had been seeking. Then the crown has changed. Whether we trust ancient magic or the wisdom of 8 centuries of tradition. The crown is the law," Meryn insisted, leaning forward in her chair, feeling the weight of the circlet on her head, the connection to the kingdom flowing through her like a river. "It is older than any document, older than this kingdom, older than the founding itself. The written laws were created by people who did not understand what the crown truly was, who made assumptions about its nature based on limited experience. If we dismiss written law in favor of magical whim, we open the door to chaos. How do we govern if we cannot trust that laws mean what they say? This is not whim. The crown has been evaluating potential rulers for 800 years. It has accepted kings, yes, but it has also rejected male heirs when they were unworthy. It remained silent until his younger brother was brought forward, and only then did it awaken. The crown has always chosen based on fitness to rule, not on blind adherence to gender. The assumption that it would only accept men was our mistake, not the crown's limitation. The debate continued, and Marin felt the kingdom fracturing further with each passing day. She needed to do something, needed to prove that she was capable, that the crown had been right to choose her. But she was effectively trapped in the palace, surrounded by guards who were not sure whether they were protecting her or imprisoning her. The palace itself became a prison of protocol and suspicion. Guards watched her with expressions that ranged from loyalty to barely concealed contempt, showing her the fragile threads holding everything together beginning to fray. It was during one of these sleepless nights that she felt something new through the crown, a presence reaching toward her through the magic, testing the connection. Marin reached back tentatively, and a flood of emotion came through. Hope, disbelief, fear. This woman had spent her life believing she was forbidden from ever wielding power, and now the crown was telling her that the barrier had been broken, that everything had changed. The connection faded, but it left Marin with a realization. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every woman who had been told she could not lead, could not rule, could not claim the power she was capable of wielding. The crown had not just chosen her, it had chosen to make a statement, to break a barrier that had stood for centuries, to prove that the limitations were artificial rather than fundamental. That understanding gave her strength, and it gave her a plan. He came to her chambers one evening, looking tired and worried, and he spoke with the bluntness of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You are losing, Your Majesty. The opposition is gaining ground. More regions are declaring independence. The military commanders who support you are being pressured to switch sides. I can feel it through the crown, the fracturing, the breaking apart. Tell me what I can do." "You must go to the regions that oppose you. You must face them directly, show them who you are and what you can do. The crown chose you for a reason. Let them see that reason. They will not let me enter their territories. They have declared independence. They will see my arrival as an invasion, as an attempt to force submission. Then go without an army. Go with a small escort. Go openly. Go as someone seeking dialogue rather than imposing authority. Show them that you are not a tyrant, but a ruler who wants to understand her people. And show them what the crown allows you to do, the connection, the understanding, the ability to sense what they need. Demonstrate that you are not just a woman who stole the crown, but the ruler the kingdom has been waiting for. It was dangerous. It was possibly suicidal. Would see her death as solving their problem more cleanly than negotiation ever could. But she also felt that Theres was right, that hiding in the palace would only make things worse, that she needed to be visible, to be real, to be someone they could see and judge for themselves rather than the monster their imaginations had created. So she agreed. She spent 3 days preparing, all of whom understood they might be marching to their deaths. She wrote letters to each of the rebelling regions, requesting audiences, promising she came in peace. And she removed the crown for the first time since it had chosen her, placing it in a secure vault, because she wanted to meet her opponents as herself, not as a symbol that inflamed their anger. But even without the crown physically on her head, she could still feel its connection, still sense the kingdom through it. The magic did not require her to wear it constantly. It had bound her at a level deeper than mere contact. These were not evil people. I am Queen Marin. I have come to speak with your lords. I am unarmed, I come in peace. The soldiers conferred, sent messengers, and eventually allowed her to pass. But she was escorted like a prisoner, surrounded by armed men who made it clear that any wrong move would be her last. Where the banners that usually displayed the kingdom's crest had been replaced with the sigils of the three houses. They sat on a raised platform as equals rather than subjects, and they looked at her with suspicion, anger, and something that might have been curiosity. Lord Viren, the eldest of the three, spoke first. His voice was cold, formal. "We do not recognize your authority. State your business and leave." Marin took a breath, centering herself, feeling the crown's connection, showing her these men's fears, their genuine belief that they were defending something important. "I understand your objection," she said, keeping her voice calm, respectful. "I grew up with the same law. I was taught that women could not rule, that the crown would not accept me, that my only purpose was to marry well and support whatever man inherited the throne. But the crown has spoken. It chose me clearly and undeniably, and I believe it did so because the kingdom needs something that centuries of kings have not provided. And what could a woman provide that a man cannot? But I know that the crown felt something in me that it did not feel in Grieven, that it had not felt in any male heir for generations. Perhaps it is something in how I see the kingdom, how I understand its people. But the crown can feel such things. It has always been able to feel them. And it chose. It has rejected heirs before when they were unworthy. The crown has never been a passive object. It is the embodied will of the kingdom itself, the magic that connects ruler to realm. And if it says I am meant to rule, then who are we to argue with 800 years of accumulated wisdom? Lord Viren leaned forward, his eyes hard. Prove it. Prove that the crown chose you for a reason. Show us what you can do that Grieven could not. Marin felt the crown's magic stir, felt it showing her what the eastern provinces needed, what problems they faced that they had not told anyone about, what suffering they endured in silence. Your region has been struggling with a plague that affects livestock. Your cattle herds are dying, and your people are going hungry because of it. The royal physicians have sent treatments multiple times over the past 6 months, but nothing has worked. The plague continues to spread, and you are beginning to lose hope that it can be stopped. It connects me to the kingdom, lets me feel what is wrong, even when I am not told directly. So they sent the same treatments, but this is different, and has recently awakened because of changes in how you have been using your land. What kind of changes? You converted several traditional pastures to crop fields 5 years ago, following advice from agricultural advisors who promised higher yields. Awakened spores that had been safely contained, and those spores are what is killing your cattle. The treatments the physicians sent were designed for a bacterial infection. This is fungal, and it requires a completely different approach. Every king you have ever served had this connection. My father had it. My grandfather had it. I have it now, and I am offering to use it to help you, to prove that the crown knew what it was doing when it chose me. The lords were silent, and through the crown's connection, Marin could feel their conflict. But they also wanted to save their herds, to stop their people from going hungry, and she had just demonstrated knowledge that she should not possess. Lord Viren asked finally, and Marin heard the grudging respect beginning to creep into his tone. Your ancestors used it to treat their herds long before modern agricultural methods. The knowledge was lost when your region converted to new farming techniques, but the plant still grows and it still works. Send people to harvest it. They will need to go high, above the tree line. Brew it into a strong tonic, concentrated and bitter. Give it to the infected animals and isolate them from the healthy ones for 5 days. The plague will die within a week, and your herds will recover. And if this does not work, if we follow your advice and lose more animals, then I will have been wrong, and you will have more evidence that the crown made a mistake in choosing me. But I do not believe I am wrong. The crown is showing me this with absolute certainty. It knows your land, knows what grows there, knows what your people need. They sent people to the mountains, found the plant Marin had described, silver leaves and white blossoms, exactly as she had said. They harvested it, brewed it according to her instructions, and administered it to the dying cattle. Within 3 days the infected animals began to recover. Within a week the plague was gone entirely. The herds that had been decimated began to rebuild, and the people who had been facing starvation had hope again. The message was formal, but contained an undercurrent of shocked respect. Your Majesty, you were correct. The plague is cured. We ... would like to speak with you again. The second meeting was different. How did you know about that plant? Even our oldest healers had forgotten it existed. The crown showed me. It holds memories of the kingdom, of how it was worked and cared for through generations. When I asked it how to help you, it reached back through time and showed me what your ancestors knew, what had been lost but could be recovered. This is not what we expected. We thought the crown had malfunctioned, that it had chosen you in error or through corruption. But this knowledge, this connection, it is real. It is what the legends say a true ruler possesses. It is what every king has possessed, Marin said. I am not doing anything new. I am simply doing what was always meant to be done, listening to the kingdom, understanding its needs, responding with wisdom that comes from connection rather than just from books and advisors. Another lord, younger than Viren, leaned forward. But you are a woman. For 800 years we assumed that only men could carry this connection, could wield this power. But the crown did not make that rule. We did. The crown has always evaluated fitness to rule based on capability, on dedication, on love for the kingdom. Gender was never the determining factor. I am saying that any woman with the right qualities could, just as not every man can. The crown has rejected male heirs before. It has always been selective. What has changed is not the crown's nature, but our understanding of it. We have finally realized that the limitations we imposed were not the crown's limitations, but our own. Word of what happened in the eastern provinces spread quickly. The queen who broke the law could cure plagues with knowledge from the crown. She could sense what the kingdom needed in ways that seemed almost miraculous. The lords of 3 noble houses that had declared her illegitimate had knelt before her and pledged their loyalty. Perhaps she was not an aberration, but exactly what the kingdom had been waiting for. Marin traveled to other regions, met with other lords and councils who had rejected her, and in each place she demonstrated what the crown allowed her to do. In the northern provinces, she helped address a famine by identifying trade routes that had been overlooked, and by creating distribution networks that the previous administration had never considered. In the southern provinces, she helped resolve a bitter water dispute that had been ongoing for 3 generations, understanding through the crown the underground rivers that both sides had been fighting over. In the western provinces, she helped prepare for a harsh winter by sensing weather patterns through the crown, by feeling the land signals that traditional meteorological methods had missed. There were still those who believed she had corrupted the crown through dark magic, who saw her successes as evidence that she was using forbidden powers rather than legitimate authority. Perhaps the law had been wrong. Perhaps 800 years of tradition had blinded them to a truth the crown had always known, that capability mattered more than gender, that the kingdom needed the best ruler, not just a male ruler. He had accepted the crown's choice publicly, had even defended Meryn when others questioned her legitimacy. But through the crown's connection, Meryn could feel his resentment, his sense of displacement, his belief that he had been robbed of something that should have been his. She met with him privately in a garden where they could speak without being overheard. I do not blame you for what happened, but I also do not understand it. The crown was meant for me. I am the rightful heir by law, and it chose you instead. I know, and I am sorry. I did not seek this. I did not want to take what was yours. Did you not? You were trained for this. Your father prepared you to rule. I wanted to rule. I believed I could serve the kingdom well. But I also believed the law, believed the crown would never accept me. When it called to me, I thought I was imagining it. But the pull was too strong to resist. So you followed your ambition. I followed the crown. There is a difference. Reuven was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want from me? Do you want me to leave? To disappear so I am not a reminder of what you took? No, I want you to stay. I want you to serve the kingdom because you have skills I lack. You are a military commander. You understand defense and strategy in ways I never will. The kingdom needs that. I need that. You want me to serve you? To be your subordinate? I want you to be my partner. Not in ruling, the crown will not share that, but in governing, in using your strengths to complement mine so that together we can give the kingdom what it needs. That is easy for you to say. You have the crown. You have the power. I have nothing. You have experience and knowledge. You have the respect of the military. You have connections in regions I have not yet reached. Those are not nothing." He left without agreeing, but through the crown's connection, Meryn felt something shift in him. Not acceptance, not yet, but a grudging acknowledgment that perhaps she was trying to do the right thing, that perhaps the crown had not been entirely wrong. The months passed and Meryn's rule solidified. She made mistakes, of course. She was still learning, still discovering what the crown could do and what it could not. And with each success the kingdom's acceptance grew. She reformed the law, officially removing the prohibition against women ruling. But Meryn pointed out that the tradition had been wrong, that the crown itself had proven it, and eventually they agreed. Regional governors. Not because they were women, but because they were capable, and because the crown showed her that the kingdom had been wasting half its potential by excluding them. And slowly the kingdom transformed, not just in who could rule, but in how it was ruled. Meryn governed through connection, through understanding her people's needs, rather than imposing solutions from above. The crown gave her that ability, and she used it well. The transformation touched every aspect of governance. The legal system became more humane without becoming less rigorous. And even Grieven admitted grudgingly that he could not have designed better systems. In regional governance, Marin found that women administrators often had strengths in areas that had been neglected. They built better social support networks because they understood the challenges that families faced. They improved education because they valued it more highly, having been denied it themselves, because they had spent years watching from the outside and noticing inefficiencies that insiders overlooked. Not every appointment succeeded. Marin made mistakes, chose people who were not ready or who could not handle the opposition they faced. Some regions rejected female governors entirely, made their positions impossible through constant resistance and sabotage. The kingdom had been wasting half its potential, had been limiting itself based on arbitrary characteristics rather than actual capability. And as the successes accumulated, as women proved themselves again and again in roles they had been forbidden from holding, the opposition weakened. The cultural transformation extended beyond government. Merchant families began training daughters in business, realizing that denying them education was leaving money on the table. Crafts guilds began accepting female apprentices, discovering that gender had nothing to do with manual skill or artistic talent. Some fathers disowned daughters who pursued education. Some husbands forbade wives from learning to read, afraid that knowledge would make them disobedient. Marin felt every instance of resistance through the crown, that her very existence as queen had made life harder for women in certain parts of the kingdom. She addressed this in multiple ways. First, she made it a crime to physically attack someone for pursuing a lawful profession, regardless of gender. The law was difficult to enforce in remote regions, but it established a principle. Third, she created protection programs for women facing domestic violence related to their pursuit of opportunities, giving them places to go and resources to rebuild their lives. Most importantly, she spoke. In every public appearance, in every speech, in every interaction with her subjects, she made it clear that the crown supported women's advancement, that resistance was not just defying her, but defying the ancient magic that had chosen her, not everywhere, not completely, but enough. Young people especially embraced the change. But he also had a deep sense of duty, a commitment to the kingdom that eventually outweighed his personal resentment. They never became friends. The wound of displacement was too deep for that. But they developed mutual respect, learned to trust each other's judgment, became effective collaborators despite the uncomfortable history between them, created an officer corps that was professional and disciplined. Under his guidance, the kingdom's defenses became formidable, and potential enemies learned that attacking would be costly. Marin, meanwhile, used the crown's connection to address internal problems that no military could solve. Understanding through the crown which regions could afford higher taxes and which were struggling, she improved infrastructure, building roads and bridges in areas that had been neglected. She supported agriculture with knowledge the crown provided about soil management and crop rotation. She reformed the justice system, appointing judges based on merit and ensuring that laws were applied fairly regardless of wealth or status. Both connected and capable, the kingdom prospered, grew in ways that neither could have achieved alone. The prosperity was visible everywhere. Cities expanded as trade brought wealth. As wealth increased, inequality became more visible. Some regions and families benefited more than others from the economic changes. Urban areas grew wealthy, while some rural regions remained poor, despite agricultural improvements. Merchants and craftspeople prospered, while day laborers saw little change in their circumstances. She implemented progressive taxation, requiring the wealthy to contribute more to the kingdom's treasury. She funded education more heavily in poor regions, trying to give everyone access to opportunity. Nobles complained that their taxes were funding laziness, that the poor should work harder rather than relying on royal charity. But Marin persisted. The crown showed her that a kingdom where many struggled while few prospered was unstable. That inequality bred resentment, and resentment bred conflict. She would rather address the problem through policy than wait for it to explode into violence. System that collected taxes from prosperous regions and distributed them to struggling ones. The common fund was controversial but effective. Cultural changes accompanied economic ones. The kingdom's social structure transformed. This cultural transformation created deep anxiety in those who benefited from traditional structures. Nobles saw their privileges eroding. There were attempts to reverse the changes. Conservative factions formed, campaigning to restore the old laws, to return to traditional gender roles, to protect noble privilege. They argued that Marin's reforms were destroying the kingdom's character, that rapid change was dangerous, that the old ways had worked for centuries and should not be abandoned. Marin responded not by suppressing these factions, but by engaging with them. She understood through the crown that their fear was genuine, that they were not simply evil but uncertain, afraid of losing something they valued. She held public forums where conservatives could voice their concerns, where she could respond, where dialogue could happen, instead of just conflict. She acknowledged that change was difficult, that some people were being left behind by the new economy and culture, that not everyone benefited equally from her reforms. But she also argued that the old system had been unjust, that its stability had been built on denying opportunity to most people, that returning to it would mean returning to widespread suffering that had been invisible to those at the top. These dialogues did not convince everyone, but they convinced enough people that violent backlash was contained, that change could continue, that the kingdom could transform without tearing itself apart. Through all of this, Marin aged faster than she should have. The responsibility that never lifted even for a moment, it drained her life force steadily. By her 50th year, she looked 60. By her 60th, she looked 75, her hair white, her face deeply lined, her body bent with exhaustion that sleep could not cure. Tomas, her husband, watched this deterioration with growing alarm. "The crown is killing you," he said one night as he helped her to bed. She had spent the day mediating a dispute between two regions, and was so exhausted she could barely stand. "I know," Marin said. "Every ruler who has worn it has paid this price. The connection requires energy, and it draws that energy from the one who wears the crown. I will have fewer years than I might have had otherwise, but I will have used those years well. Is it worth it, dying young to serve the kingdom? Yes, without the crown I would be nothing. Just another woman denied opportunity, another life wasted by unjust law." The crown gave me the chance to serve, to matter, to transform things. I would make the trade again without hesitation. But Thomas saw how much it cost her, and he made sure she rested when possible, took breaks from official duties, spent time with their children. Those moments of peace were precious to Marin, brief respites from the crown's constant pressure, and she treasured them. Her children grew up watching their mother carry this burden, understanding that ruling was not glory, but sacrifice. Elara, the eldest, studied governance with an intensity that sometimes worried Marin. She wanted to be ready when her time came, wanted to carry the crown as well as her mother had, and she drove herself hard in preparation. "You do not have to be me," Marin told her one afternoon as they walked in the palace gardens. Elara was 18, brilliant and dedicated, already sitting in on council meetings. "The crown will show you what you need to know. It will guide you. You do not have to carry all this knowledge before you wear it." "But you carried so much," Elara said. "You knew the kingdom before the crown chose you. You were prepared. I want to be equally prepared." "I thought I was prepared. But nothing truly prepares you for the crown's weight. You will learn when the time comes. For now, be young. Enjoy these years before duty consumes everything." But Elara could not set aside her sense of responsibility, could not stop preparing for a future she knew was coming. She had inherited her mother's dedication, her commitment to service, and Marin saw in her the qualities the crown would recognize when the time came. The years passed, and Marin's reputation solidified not just within the kingdom, but beyond its borders. Other kingdoms heard of the queen who had broken 800 years of law, who governed through connection rather than force, who had transformed her realm while maintaining stability. Some saw her as an inspiration, proof that women could rule. Others saw her as a dangerous radical whose ideas should be contained before they spread. Diplomatic relations became complicated. Some kingdoms sought alliances with Marin, wanting to associate themselves with her success. Others worked to isolate her, afraid that her example might inspire women in their own realms to demand equal treatment. Marin navigated these complications carefully, building relationships where possible, maintaining respectful distance where necessary. When foreign dignitaries visited, they often expressed surprise at how normal the kingdom seemed. They had expected chaos, disorder, decline, all the things traditional wisdom said would result from female rule. Instead, they found prosperity, stability, a functioning government, a content people. Some left convinced that perhaps tradition had been wrong. Others left believing that Marin was an exception, that her success did not invalidate the general rule that women should not rule. Marin did not try to convince the skeptics. She simply governed well, let her actions speak for themselves, and trusted that eventually the results would be undeniable. Other kingdoms would see that female rule worked, that capability mattered more than gender, and they would adapt. Or they would not, and they would fall behind kingdoms that used all their citizens' potential rather than arbitrarily limiting it. When Marin finally felt her health beginning to fail in earnest, when the crown showed her that her time was ending, she was 70 years old, but looked 90. She had given the kingdom everything she had poured her life force into the connection that bound her to the realm, and she had no regrets. But the crown took its toll on Marin. The constant connection to the kingdom, the feeling of millions of lives pressing against her consciousness, the weight of responsibility that never lifted, even for a moment. By her 50th year, she looked 60. By her 60th, she looked 75. The crown gave her knowledge and connection, but it also drained her, feeding on her life force to maintain the bond between ruler and realm. She knew this was happening. The crown showed her the cost, made it clear that every ruler who wore it sacrificed years of their life. But she also knew the alternative, a kingdom without connection, without the deep understanding that allowed rulers to govern wisely. The trade seemed worth it. When she felt her health beginning to fail in earnest, when the crown showed her that her time was ending, she prepared her succession with meticulous care. She had married late in life, choosing a man who supported her rule without trying to claim authority through her. His name was Thomas, and he had been a scholar who studied the crown's history, who understood what Maren carried and respected it. They had 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son. Maren raised them all equally, teaching them governance and statecraft, ensuring that all understood the kingdom they might one day serve. But it was Elara, the eldest daughter, who showed from childhood the qualities the crown recognized. She was thoughtful, dedicated, patient, deeply committed to understanding the kingdom and its people. When Maren finally removed the crown and placed it on Elara's head, it awakened immediately. There was no doubt, no hesitation, no moment of silence. The crown sang with recognition, binding Elara to the kingdom with the same force it had shown for Maren, and the transition was complete. The kingdom barely noticed the change in rulership. Elara had been trained so thoroughly, had learned so much from watching her mother, that governance continued without disruption. There were no protests, no questions about legitimacy. The crown had chosen, and the kingdom accepted its choice without debate. That acceptance was Maren's greatest achievement. The crown's choice of Elara was celebrated rather than contested, and women throughout the kingdom saw it as confirmation that the barriers really were gone, that the opportunities really were real. Maren died 3 years after stepping down quietly, surrounded by family. She was 73, but looked 90, worn down by decades of carrying the crown's weight. But she died satisfied, knowing she had served well, knowing the kingdom was in capable hands, knowing she had opened doors that would never close again. Her last thought was of a young girl somewhere in the kingdom, growing up knowing she could be anything, knowing the crown might choose her, knowing that capability was all that mattered. Grieven outlived her by 2 years. He served Elara as faithfully as he had served Maren, though he never quite reconciled with having been passed over. When he died, the kingdom honored him as a great military commander and a loyal servant, and Elara spoke at his funeral about the partnership he and Maren had built despite their difficult beginning. The silent crown continued to choose rulers based on capability. Sometimes it chose women, sometimes men, but always it looked past gender to find the qualities that mattered: wisdom, dedication, love for the kingdom. The law that had once forbidden women from ruling became a historical curiosity, something people studied to understand how far the kingdom had come. And Maren was remembered not as the queen who broke the law, but as the queen who revealed the truth that the crown had always known what people had forgotten, that gender was irrelevant to fitness to rule, that the barriers had always been artificial, that the kingdom was stronger when everyone could contribute. The silent crown had bent, and in bending it had broken 800 years of unjust law. It had shown that tradition could be wrong, that ancient magic was wiser than written rules, that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty was defiance. Marin had been forbidden by blood and law, but the crown had recognized something that laws could not measure, something that tradition had obscured. It had seen capability, dedication, love for the kingdom, and it had bent irreversibly and completely, ensuring that no one would ever again be forbidden simply because of gender. The law had been absolute, until it was not, until the crown proved that some things were more fundamental than law, and that sometimes the greatest rulers were those who were never supposed to rule at all. This has been a story of forbidden crowns and bent traditions, of laws proven wrong and magic proven wise. If this tale moved you, if you felt the frustration of being denied what you deserved or the triumph of seeing justice done, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Can ancient laws be wrong? Should tradition bow to capability? When magic and law conflict, which should we trust? Your reflections give these stories meaning, and I would be honored to hear them. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of the silent bond, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, so you may return when the next story is told, when another tradition is challenged, and when crowns perhaps bend once more.